Hey, what's up, Neelesh? How's it going?
Hey Joe, thanks. I'm good. How are you?
Good, doing very well. So, hey, before the show, we were just talking about you went on some trips, so it's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
So
it was fun. Went to Thailand and Bali for like 10 days just to relax. It was fine.
it's such a relaxing time to get over there. So
Yeah.
that's so cool. Yeah, but you're back in the States, I guess. So we'll back in podcast mode and work mode. So that's cool for the audience who doesn't know who you are. Do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, certainly. I am Nilesh. I'm a staff software engineer currently at DBT. I work mostly inside our org, which is responsible for um, building the adapter experience in our cloud offering. So basically, looking at the open source adapters and community adapters and making sure they are positioned well in our cloud and how to create that experience for customers, making sure that is smooth and we have the right interfaces. And so I recently joined that team not too long ago. And prior to that, I was mostly doing some architecture work and sort of cross-functional team. And my background is distributed systems, this product engineering, software engineering. So I don't necessarily call myself a data engineer, but I'm sort of in that realm of data engineer, data software engineer kind of a thing. So the longest I spent was at Stitch Fix, where I did a lot of like Spark, Hive, Iceberg, a lot of data problems and data metadata, data quality, solving those kind of larger issues. And yeah, it's been a unique journey. So happy to talk about that. But yeah, it's I've learned a lot of my career. So it's I'm slowly now just trying to write and like sort of trying to pay that forward and help people out who are starting on that journey.
Really cool, and it's one of these things I feel like with back in the day with software engineering, you know, it was implicitly data engineering, but it wasn't called that, right? So I would consider you whatever a data engineer is now. I mean, I define it a certain way in my book, but it's, um, if you're working with distributed systems with large amounts of data, I would say you're smack dab in the middle of whatever data engineering kind of became. But it's all terminology. At the end of the day, you're just doing the job you're hired for, given the tools you had. So it's pretty cool. I mean, what were some of the I guess progressions of practices or tools that you saw when you got into distributed systems to today?
Yeah, it's been the appropriate word is progression because I've seen these tools mature from when I started my career. So this was mid 2014 when I joined my first job at Cloudera, which was sort of a collection of a lot of tooling that they had offering for their enterprise customers. And so it had open source tooling that was, you name it, MapReduce, Hive, Impala. You had a lot of those. They used to joke around it was a zoo of animals in terms of the products, but it was all of that bundled up into a product experience for the customers. And so I work very closely there with one large customer and making sure they're okay and operations are handled. So it's very like closer to sales and like a very technical role where you had to be mindful of things and breaking in the larger distributed systems. So that gave me a sort of sense of how to think of things at scale, things to think of how what would break in those larger systems, what are the risks, and even having following the best practices. So I used to connect with the team that I was helping out with and making sure they're okay. They have any upcoming problems, if they had new product feature interests, those kinds of things. And so the difference between then and now is those products were less mature. They were early use case when I saw them. Like Spark was a baby. Like people were excited about it, but didn't know how to use it properly, and nobody did.
Right.
And that it's not them to blame, but it's how the industry progressed. Like a new technology takes time to adapt and mature, and so Spark and all of these patterns were emerging. And even data engineering is sort of a relatively newer term. I don't know when
Yeah.
it was exactly coined, but I didn't hear it back then, and it was not a thing. Even data science came soon after a few years after I sort of started my career,
Right.
and so now we're hearing more of data engineering, which kind of I think encapsulate anything data. So I sort of see myself fitting in like the platform and infrastructure piece of that. So I think it's a catch-all title at this point. Like if you're dealing with data, you're a data engineer.
It seems to be. I mean, I think it was Maxime Bishemin who maybe I think was first coining the term. I know he had the article, about data engineering back, was it 2017? I'd like to think. I could be wrong on that, but and I'd heard the term sort of thrown out, but it really wasn't a thing because it was either like you were a software engineer that was working with data, or you were a data scientist who was trying to work with data to satisfy, I guess, the old trope that data scientists spend 80-90% of their time getting data and cleaning it and so forth. So that was how I got into it. I mean, I had to do it to do my job. My background's more in ML and analytics and so forth, but I got into data engineering because there was nobody else who was going to do it for me. So I mean, you can approach it from either way, yeah. So it's interesting, and I feel it, but it's not like data science, where data science was a kind of a catch-all term that I think started with ML, then kind of gravitated towards including anything that touched data, more from maybe an end user perspective. So yeah, it's interesting to see how terms you know come into the scene and change and so forth. Now I think that the latest conversation of the week is whether ML ops and ML engineering is just data engineering in disguise, and I don't know. So it's like,
And most of these comes from like how much of the work you have to do and the tooling that's built around you. And
yeah,
I have a different perspective in this because I was not the person who's writing the jobs and writing the actual ETL to make these effects, but I was providing the framework and the infrastructure to support that. So I didn't write Spark jobs, but I built the ecosystem around that you can be successful with Spark. So
right.
that was my sort of foray into the distributed systems on the user level, where I was providing that experience and giving the customers essentially these frameworks that are beastly enough that they need a lot of abstraction. They need a lot of hiding away a lot of the cruft because the infrastructure pieces are complicated. The code itself, the APIs are complicated. So making sure it's easy for them to give them examples, give them documentation, give them easy access to these things, and making sure they're successful. I think that's where my perspective has come in over the last like 5 6 years. That you have to build these tools for them to be successful, and then
Right.
when they do it, then it's up to their ownership, their what use cases they're solving. But you give them enough that they can just sort of run wild with it.
Hmm. That's interesting, and kind of fast forwarding to you work at DBT now, like DBT's got a very interesting model where there's I think an awesome open source ecosystem, and then there's the the SaaS cloud version. I mean, how do you balance that sort of tension between I think what is arguably one of the most awesome open source projects there is and one of the most popular ones versus trying to satisfy the requirements of an enterprise product.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it tension, especially like it's mostly like the the community is pretty large. Like they're very passionate about the open source product, the product itself, and taking that energy and the sort of understanding how we can build that experience on the cloud. That's where it pretty much goes with every open source company. How you build
Hmm.
that experience that they can take advantage of the open source project in a cloud setting where they can deploy it at their own company. And so doing that is the hard part, like understanding that experience, how to build those key pieces of differentiation, if you will. And that's where success lies, in my view, for any open source company. That you can you build that differentiation? Can you make people use it in a way that is meaningful to them and give them the power to do those things? So again, it comes down to the tooling aspect of it. So I see it in that way
Hmm.
as I do product engineering versus data infrastructure building. I think of, can we build that experience for customers that they can come in and take the full advantage of the DBT core that they are familiar with, and have it in a team setting where they can do things like collaborate between the teams, manage it better. There's the whole aspect of GitHub is in like GitHub and GitLab and the other like sort of versioning and version control kind of a semantic there. So that makes sense for them to collaborate between their teams. There are multiple orgs that can use it. So that aspect doesn't come from just the native open source package. That comes from an actual product that builds like
Hmm.
SSO into it. There's a lot of different aspects that go to making a cloud product successful. And so, how do you give that to a team? What do they need? Listen to their feedback. Listen to their sort of um, any kind of product requests, any kind of bug requests. All of that sort of feeds in into how you think about continuing to deliver for your customers.
Interesting. I mean, I can imagine with something like DBT as well. It's super popular. I'm sure there's a lot of requests. Like, how do you curate and sort of triage the requests and prioritize them?
We have a stellar group of product managers who do that very effectively. So there's always a pulse check with the community. There's requests we hear from the customers. It comes through various channels, maybe like partner sales. There's like different funnels where it comes through, and then how it comes into engineering. And I'm not sure this is different from every other company, but
Right.
inside we then prioritize based on like quarterly planning, yearly planning, and make sure the high priority items get addressed. And then we have themes of, okay, we're solving this, we're solving this particular issue, and those things line up underneath those themes. And so I think it's important to have the community behind us. The It tends to help you improve your product. It also gives you a sort of level check. Okay, am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong? And I see all of those channels really valuable for us to like build upon what is already there, improve upon what's already there. Yeah,
That's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine it's got to be a lot of work for the product team there too. Just because again, it's such a huge community, and I'm sure it's a very opinionated community too. I lurk on the DBT Slack. I don't think I've ever commented on it. Maybe I should at some point, but and shout out to DBT too. I've been doing some events with them lately, and it's a wonderful group of people to work with, and really like what they're up to. So huge fan. But again, I'm just I guess I'm the weirdo who just doesn't contribute to the community at all. I like the product a lot, but I don't have much to add to the conversation there. I think it's everyone's doing their thing and they know what they want, and I don't know. So it is what
yeah.
it is.
I just hit 1 year in the company, and I can just attest to the passion that the not just the community but the people inside. Like they're nice
Yeah,
people. They're very passionate about building the product and experience for the customers, and you can see that in like internally. I can see that when people talk about things, how mindful they are of what they're building and what they're actually giving out to customers. So it's really endearing to see that as an engineer as well, that people are mindful of what they're building, and they're keeping in mind that the tooling, the software that they build is being used by people. And so there's I can speak to that, but it's mostly internal stuff. But like to sort of
yeah.
give you an overview of how this company operates, it's very driven, it's very rigorous in terms of its how it likes to deliver, and there's a lot of people behind it. And yeah,
Mm.
I'm just excited what's coming next, and like how we're sort of shaping the product for the future.
Well, yeah, and I think the product is also shaping, sort of the future of the industry. Maybe we can dive into that next. But the data landscape is, um, it's definitely evolved over the last, decade plus, right? Since I mean, when you got into early work at with distributed systems at Cloudera and so forth, like the industry is I would say somewhat recognizable from that. Mostly not. I would say a lot of it's gotten simpler, but where does it go next? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think about those, and sort of I try to map within my head, like, is it technology, is it use case, what is the leading factor pushing us to the future? I hear about things about big data being dead, and there's a lot of chatter about, like we discussed this in our last pod as well, where it was
Yeah.
how much data do you actually use? Does
Hmm.
it make sense to have these expensive tooling? And I would say yes or no, because it depends on the organization. And so
Yep.
it's hard to paint the entire landscape with a single brush, because there's smaller businesses, there's medium-sized companies, there's large FANG level Fortune 500 who are also dealing with problems around like legacy systems. They can't just upgrade from their old ways of doing and just move on to the shiniest tool coming forward. So there's a lot of nuances to deal with across the industry. But I think with tooling becoming more ubiquitous, becoming more open source being definitely being a contributing factor to that. I see a lot of people diving into understanding whether a tooling makes sense for their use cases versus just jumping into like, oh, I just need the new shiniest thing. which kind of used to happen when I used to see in Cloudera, like, oh, we need the latest version of Spark. I'm like, why do you need it? Okay, oh, we just
Right.
saw it, and it was kind of so. I'm seeing that kind of shift. Like people are actually evaluating things. People are looking at things, and this is kind of my like sense from lurking into Reddit and like these other forums where data engineering is more wildly spoken about, and it's more um, oh, I'm evaluating these three things. Which one makes sense? Which one makes sense based on my use case? So I'm happy to see that shift happen, that people are focusing on what is meaningful to them, what is actually the problem they're trying to solve. And then the
Yeah.
tooling will come and go, because tooling, like you can use Spark or Flink. It will make a difference when you evaluate within your company what's best for your company versus just saying, I want one or the other. So the evaluation period is something that you have to focus on. And that's where I think the success comes in the future in data infrastructure, where you can rightly pick not just the tooling but the frameworks that actually help you build the thing that you're trying to do, rather than going tooling for use cases but maybe not. So I
For
think being
sure.
more mindful of the problem, more mindful of how much data, there's a lot of metrics, observability portions of that, how much you're actually using. So if you're tracking those things, I think it'll be valuable to see within your own company how you're using tooling, how you're because at some point in time you'll end up with a lot of tooling. You'll have a lot of like
Hmm.
technical debt. You'll have all of those things. We can talk about technical debt as well, but there's a lot of tooling that comes in, and oh, maybe it's not purposeful anymore. We have to reshape that. So across the time and tenure of a data engineering team, there's a lot of things that go on. So you have to be sort of on track of deduping things, making sure things are working. And I can go on and on, but like the idea is like being more, um, sort of be concrete of what you're building in terms of the problem you're solving rather than the tooling.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, right? If you kind of harken back to the early days of big data, for example, right? Hadoop and the whole ecosystem there. I fondly remember, there was definitely, I think, a rush to want to try out these new tools and implement them in your organization, whether or not they made any sense, because it was like, well, it's obviously the new thing, and so we got to jump on this big data. So MapReduce was, I think adopted, and maybe in some cases it made sense. In some cases it certainly did not. But it opened people's eyes to, sort of the art of the possible with these, maybe a new way of thinking. Because before, you got to remember, it's like, I mean, the Hadoop ecosystem is open source and, meant to run on commodity hardware. Before that, I mean, if you wanted data systems, MPP systems, it was like you're going to be spending a lot of money going through a pretty atrocious sales cycle. And I don't think anyone misses those days. Maybe some people do, and some of the vendors certainly miss those days. You're making a lot of money back then, but and I observed the same thing with Spark. Right, Spark was definitely definitely had a leg up on Hive and Hadoop and that whole paradigm, really, and so that was an exciting thing. I remember checking out Spark and using it. I think first day it came out at open source. So it was cool. I mean, part of it was a novelty that, yeah, this is like a in memory system that's highly performant, and let's check it out. But along the way, though, you kind of fast forward from, what was that, 2014 or something like that, when Spark was first open source, to today, and that's almost 10 years now. And what's happened along the way is, I think we developed better mental models for how to think about solving data problems. Along the way, the tooling has become greatly abstracted to the point where I mean, if you want Spark, it's as simple as getting a credit card and spinning it up. It's not that hard anymore. Like the magic or the headache of spinning up a Spark cluster just isn't really there anymore, unless you want to do that, and you can. But so it's interesting now, because, like you say, in Reddit, you have the option of evaluating three tools, and like I imagine the evaluation process is fairly straightforward. You have your criteria. You couldn't do that back in the day. It would be so hard. You'd have to spin all this stuff up, and you weren't even sure what metrics to check out to try and evaluate it. Just because or you had your own use case. But now there's more discussion in this, and it feels like just the knowledge is consolidated a lot, and that's really cool to see. So.
Yeah, I agree. Even something as simple as using Docker Compose is very easy to deploy and just have it in your system. Oh, I'm testing a bunch of things at the same time. Yeah, go crazy, because
Yeah.
it's much easier than having to take a trial of some vendor or some other
Right.
thing, and then just look at, okay, does this make sense? But it doesn't cover all the use cases in like a beta or a preview. And we, we touched upon Spark, but Spark is a beast. It takes a lot to get successful with Spark in terms
Oh
of
yeah.
it is very powerful. You get the tooling that you need. You get all that all the jazz underneath. You get SQL, you get Python, Scala, whatever in terms of the API. But building a universe around that, building an ecosystem around that, it takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of like infrastructure costs, whether running on Kubernetes, EMR, you're running on any sort of whatever your execution layer is, and there's also building that sort of abstraction around how to deliver it to your customers, your internal customers in this case, and making sure they're understanding what they can use and how much debuggability they have, how much diagnosis they can do, because Spark is also a tuning heavy system in terms of how can I tune memory, how can I tune sort of CPU, how these other parameters. There's a
Hmm.
lot of configuration buttons that you can
A
use,
lot.
and it
A
can
lot.
get overwhelming. It did for a lot of people, myself
Hmm.
included, at some point in time. But
Sure.
um, it's uh, it's how you get these tools internally and making them used in the right way, and also hiding away the cruft that is powering them. Like you don't want your engineers to understand, or data scientists, or whoever your customers is, know where it's running and be bothered about resource allocation, be worried about memory or running out of memory, and having best practices not being followed. Like if somebody's doing bad things in their code, you should have enough like sort of training or examples to tell them like, okay, don't follow this. This is an anti pattern. So it's a lot of a mix of abstractions and making sure things are hid away and the craft is hid away to get people to succeed in these tooling rather than just the tooling themselves.
Hmm. Yeah. And it really feels like too. It's the what's also improved is just again sort of the knowledge around best practices. Like I always found that knowledge was the biggest gap with a lot of implementations, right? So even if you had great tooling, it's like, do you know how to use it? Do you have a playbook for your team in terms of like what are you trying to do? And just how are you going to leverage these tools to their fullest capabilities? And that's, now you can go on Reddit, like you say, and there's a million different opinions on it, and a lot of them are pretty good, right? It's not a total dumpster fire. You go on DBT Slack, and people are asking great questions, and they have great comments, and I think people just really understand, the kind of the underlying patterns as well as the tool itself. Documentation certainly helps. I think DBT, for example, the documentation is quite amazing, and that's I've always found like that. This knowledge and level setting is one of the cruxes of getting adoption and being successful, either as a technology vendor or, adopting technologies. And so
Yeah,
it's,
I
so otherwise you have to
I can
figure it out the hard way. So,
yeah, I can very really attest to that, because when I joined Stitch Fix, my the customers that our team was responsible for were data scientists who came from academia, who had
mm,
very little to no experience with Spark or have not seen it. And so I used to run office hours with some newer data scientists who joined the team, and even like older ones who were sort of who have adopted Spark, and just like, hey, let's address the problems you're seeing. Can we look at the ETL you're writing? Can we look at patterns? So I had to do a lot of knowledge transfer there, because I was early day Spark, but I didn't know a lot of the things in the usability side, like how people are actually deploying and how you're using it in the lens of like Cloudera customers, yes, but like how it's happening in a data science perspective, how it's happening in some other form of use case. But so that was also a learning for me when I came in. Okay, not just like imparting knowledge, but like understanding how people are using it and the understanding the usage patterns, and then diving into concerns. Okay, people are concerned it's running out of memory. They don't know how much to tune. So we set defaults. We set easy defaults that people can just hit the ground running. And so they don't have to worry about it. Some user errors kept popping up. So we had to clean those up, making sure debuggability is easy. So we threw a history server behind it. So all of those like came out of conversations and feedback we got from our users, and we adapted to those concerns. And
interesting.
so learning from that, we took surveys, we did all those like internal conversations where the data scientists back then, or my customers, were very sort of passionate and like sort of gave us the right feedback. Oh, this is not working for me. I think this could be done better. And there was always a race whether sometimes the data scientists would go and build off some sort of abstractions by themselves, and so we had to catch up sometimes. And so we had to catch those trends a little bit more sooner than it became an actual tool on its own. And so that was kind of a race we had to fight with
Interesting.
these seriously technical people who were passionate about the product and wanted to build something to ease their own sort of misery in some ways.
It's really cool that you're paying attention to the users, though, right? I think all too often the engineers want to just focus on the engineering that they're focused on, but it's um, data has a life cycle, right? And it's sort of like you have stakeholders and people who are depending on whatever you're supporting, and it's rare actually to see that, right? So at least in my experience, I don't know, but maybe your
Yeah, I
experience
mean,
might be different. So
it's good to think about that because that's who you're building for, and that's like engineering in my view. Like I view engineering
yeah,
as solving problems for somebody or like solving problems for whoever's going to benefit out of that, and having that sort of check in your head that, oh, I'm solving it for this. How will this person perceive the software that I write? That empathy with, in terms of debuggability, in terms of how easy and ergonomic it is to use it. Is it intuitive? All those sort of concerns, they might not like sort of fly in your face when you're building the first MVP, but it's good to be mindful of them across the life cycle of building not just software, but like data tooling, data infrastructure.
sure.
That, am I building the right thing and am I building it right?
Hmm. It's a really mature perspective. And kind of leads into something that I think is on your mind too, which is like career growth as an engineer. I mean, walk me through that. What are some of the key things that you've been thinking about with respect to career growth?
Yeah, that's a. I don't know if I have a traditional answer for that, but the one thing
Non-traditional
I,
answers are fine too. So
but the thing that I've observed over my career has been, um, at least I've been in startups all my life, so I've only known that sort of way of building software, those problems and things that you have to solve in a smaller setting. But to kind of my advantage, it helped me grow a little bit more faster than I would possibly in a larger company because what I did when I started Stitch Fix, it was a new paradigm shift for me. So I had to sort of like learn Python, learn Scala very quickly. I used to do little Java and little Scala back in Cloudera, but this is sort of a mindset change for me, and I was very eager to solve a lot of problems. And what I kept doing was asking for more responsibilities, asking for more things to own and contribute to. And that's sort of the way I kind of learned. I learned by doing. And okay, let me take up this. If I don't know, I'll ask. So I kind of built that sort of muscle across the data landscape by just doing things. Like, okay, let me look at helping solve GDPR, like, or part of it or
mm,
something. And so that sort of the disciplines that I have today took a long time to build, and that came from asking and being more sort of in the forefront and saying, I want these things. I can I do this? Can I do this? And I don't know if that's like a typical approach you can use in a company, but we were small enough that there were no people to do a lot of those things. So a person owned a lot of the different pieces together, or at least were responsible for a domain. Like I was responsible for a lot of things, Spark, Hive, and Iceberg, but there was others who were like sort of in a more supporting role, but they were in charge of something else. So it was kind of this 7 people team who had to figure out 7 people towards the end when I joined, but we were like, for the most time, we were like 4 or 5. And so we had our own areas of expertise, and I sort of went deeper into Spark, went deeper into Hive, um, and then later Iceberg. These are the sort of the large themes, but around them, I solve problems around metadata management, your um, privacy laws, you have data quality, you had all these things around that. And I sort of went along problem first, and then how to fit those with the tooling that we had, or we had to build new tooling. So that mindset came from that experience itself, and so that helped me grow, like going to leading projects. To I don't want to bog down in titles because it's different across the, but
sure.
it's the responsibility and the impact you have across your career that determines how fast you grow, how slowly you grow, and that's kind of also hurts people because they don't get to have an impact in every scenario. Like in a large company or even a smaller company, maybe you don't have the opportunity to do high visibility work or high sort of impactful work, and you're just like keeping the lights on. You're doing something
Hmm.
like making sure things are running smoothly, and that's valuable work, but it doesn't get sometimes the limelight that it should. And so that's why this kind of process of promotions and growth is kind of broken in my view. It's like it's not measuring the
Mm.
right rubric. It's not measuring, typically it's not measuring the right impact in terms of um, what the person does, how the person achieves it, and what decisions the
Mm.
person did. The person grow? Are they can they be entrusted with more responsibility? And that's where that trust factor takes a lot of time to build, and how you build it is very organizational specific, very like company specific. And that kind of part kind of bothered me even at Stitch Fix. Like there was
Mm.
no exact rubric to follow in terms of growth. Like I got promotions, but I didn't know why I did. Like did I do something
Interesting.
different? Am I ready for another level? And so those questions kind of shaped my thinking that okay, it's the impact, it's the actual work that you're doing, and people are noticing. And so I think it's not perfect. I've seen horrible promotion cycles where it was
Mm.
not clear what I improved on, and I didn't like that. Like I wanted the feedback to say, okay, I didn't do some things right. I did something right. And so promotions can be a good thing, but it takes, in larger companies, I read blogs about people struggling with promotions. They couldn't get the committee to agree. And so to just sort of summarize all of this, I think it just depends on the impact and the accountability that you can deliver in your company, and be
Yeah.
how much that sort of contributes to not necessarily dollar value, but the sort of the thing that you're solving, and how easy it makes a problem or it solves something for a customer.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, promotions are insanely tricky, I would say, because it's like even if you're a manager of a data team or a tech team, for example, or manager of any team, tech or otherwise, it's you have your own opinions on how things should work. HR has its opinions. Leadership in the board has its opinions, and so the questions I would always ask my teams when I was managing them was, it's maybe a bit controversial, but I'm like, okay, so like, what do you want your next job to be after this one, right? And the classic question, like, what do you want to be doing in a few years? And I always try and orient, um, my employees, growth, or at least, um, you know, the stuff they're working on, as much as I can, try and orient it towards something that they're stoked on, and that they think will help them in their career. Because inevitably, there's no such thing as lifetime employment. So the only thing I feel I can do is provide people a mechanism to get what they want, while I get what I want, the company gets what they want. And if those can be aligned as tightly as possible, then that's great. Because otherwise, people, if obviously it's a business, and sometimes people need to work on things they don't want to work on. That's the reality of it. And so you definitely have to balance that, 'cause you don't want it to be kind of a free for all. But I always found like aligning incentives, and people's sort of inherent goals, was at least one way to, at least keep them motivated to progress in their careers. And so I can't say that maybe that's the best way to do it. It totally depends on the type of company you're at. But I always like to get those questions out up front. Like, what do you want to do after this job? Because everyone has that. Everyone views a job as a stepping stone to something else, whether they admit it or not. That is the case. Maybe they want it. So try and help people get what they want out of the job that they're hired to do. I think they're going to hopefully put more of their best self forward, but sometimes they don't. That also happens. So it's hiring and promotions and that whole thing is just, it's a very tricky thing. I swear it's a coin flip on a good day. So you just never know. And the thing is, things happen with people too. Like you could, it could be the best candidate coming in, and just something happens in their life, midway through, and it's just, there's nothing you can do about it. I remember one guy, sort of an opposite thing, where he wasn't performing at all, and he came highly recommended as a great engineer, but some days he would be late, some days he wouldn't show up. I had to say, like, look, dude, like, if this continues, I mean, we're gonna have to part ways. It is what it is. Yeah, but then he told me his spouse actually didn't want him going to work. And I'm just like, okay, that's interesting, because this is actually about the time I was about to let him go. And then He's like, I'm going through a lot of problems right now. And I'm like, okay, I mean, you don't need to tell me many details, but I'm here for you, man. I mean, this is a, because I know you're talented. I know you're smart and capable, but, I'd love to see you progress to, something bigger and better in your career. But, stuff like this is going to hold you back no matter where you work at. So let's, so I was just there as a sounding board. Again, I'm not going to get involved in personal stuff, but he ended up, making some changes in his life, and he ended up becoming a director, and so I mean, things could happen too, but you just never know what's going on with people, nor is it your job to really dig into that. I mean, it's personal business, but that's sort of the weird balance with promotions is, there's factors outside of work too that just influence people, and COVID especially, like, kind of ripped the Band-Aid off on that one because people just went through all kinds of inner stuff that just sort of came out. So
Yeah, I see that we're all fighting a battle within our own selves. Like we're battling aspects in our own life. And there's a mask that we wear to work. I
yeah.
kind of see that, and I think I heard it in your podcast with Zach or some other one that tech is a meat
Mm-hmm.
grinder. It's like it takes
Can
a
be.
lot out of you, and that's where like the empathy factor comes in. When I mentioned it earlier, but you kind of hit the nail on the head with that, because it's understanding what, not just to direct reports, but like what people are going through, and being
Mm-hmm.
mindful of that and giving them space to either recover or make sure they get the right help they need and be successful, because everybody operates differently. Everybody has their own style of working, has their own way of doing things, and I think you have to trust them to do it in the way that they can be more productive. Like sometimes I don't work all afternoon. Sometimes I just go to sleep if I can't. I just like work later in the evening. So as long as I'm doing the work, I think my manager doesn't have a problem. Like he's pretty sensible, and my teammates sometimes do that, and it's totally fine. So as long as you have that autonomy and trust within your employees, within your teammates, I think that can go a long way for just building a healthy org and building a healthy team, and just like sort of that will result in a healthy org. But continuing the development of your of the person in question, and also the org itself, so you know
Yeah.
that you're doing this right by them and the business itself, that you're trusting them to get the work done. And so that's where I see even like taking vacations, taking time off, that's very personal. It's like, okay, just take the time you need to recover, take the time you need to um, be okay to do your job, essentially. And that's where I think that's where good orgs succeed in being where they are, because you can build products if you have good people, if you have people
Mm.
who you can entrust with that fact of, oh, they will get the job done, they will do the thing that's needed, but I need to impart trust. And I think another bigger aspect of not just managers or tech leads or any other sort of leadership role, it's sort of unblocking people is also another aspect of their
That's a
role, and
big
it
one.
should be that. Can I remove the barriers that is stopping them from being successful? That can be org processes, that can be anything else, tooling. Um, those are aspects that sort of go unsaid, or seldomly said as part of this. But I view that as, I joked around this once. So like it's as you go higher, it's unblocking as a service, or
Oh yeah.
unblocking others as a service is mostly your role than like just going and coding stuff. It's like, can you
Oh,
remove the
that's very
barriers?
true.
Can you remove the barriers for people to be successful, or not allowing people to be successful? And can you help them to do the thing that they can effectively?
Hmm. Yeah, that's super true, and I think it's advice for especially engineers out there that are listening to this. There's kind of two tracks you can take in your career that you can maybe become a principal or staff engineer. That's certainly one. And if you're really good at engineering and you don't want to manage people, that's certainly a route you can take. If you want to, the other path is obviously management. And traditionally, that's always been kind of the path to moving up the ladder, so to speak. But it really feels like, I mean, my personal observation is most people probably shouldn't manage. Like it is a different skill set, and the problem that I have with how management works at a lot of companies is individual contributors who are great at their job are thrown into management. There's no training about how to be a great manager. It's just like, well, obviously, since you're great at coding and developing systems, that automatically means you're going to be a great manager, which is a horrible fallacy. But that unfortunately is, the career progression traditionally, if you wanted to make more money, not just in tech, but in any field, really. It's like, you move into management, and that's how it is. But again, what I see lacking in that is people are thrown into management, and maybe they could be great managers, but they're set up to fail typically. Show me how many management classes or management training, or even books people are provided to help them become better managers, right? I've rarely seen that. So
Yeah, I don't know where I'll end up, but I like to stay to the IC track because I like being closer to the technical side of things, like
yeah,
being closer to the problem, like solving them at a higher level, whatever level. I'll even go and write the thing. It's that part of me that's I don't think that'll go away, and so um, I think the skill to be a good manager takes time to develop, and I don't know if people tend to get successful as they start, but like eventually, assuming you have the training, you have the resources to be successful, or you have mentorship, which is another big aspect of engineering
big
that I
one.
want to that I don't know why people don't talk about it, but that also helps you sort of or guide you in a way that you can be successful in the role that is being an IC
Mentorship
or
is
a
so
manager
huge. It's
doesn't
so
matter.
huge.
Doesn't matter. Yeah, essentially. And yeah, it's like those are parallel tracks, if you will, like IC and manager. It's just different ways of influencing the org, I would say. At a principal level, I spoke to one Amazon guy and he was telling his old job is just talking to VPs and product managers and just setting expectations in different places. That's it. And he doesn't do a lot of coding, but moving the team and the org in a technical direction is another harder piece. Like, how do you influence people? How do you use that influence to get technical decisions or work done? And that's where I think the higher levels sort of operate at. It's more like, can you tell me what to do or tell me not what to do, or tell me what not to do? And that's where the struggle lies of how do you develop that skill.
Mm,
And I learned by doing so. I've learned a lot of like I've hit a lot of failures and like, okay, wait, this is not how you do it. This is how you do it. And so I
right.
keep those things in mind as we decide things and as we progress. But uh, but yeah, it's either track is harder. I would say it's not like it's a bed of roses for each of them. But and more recently with all these layoffs, I think people are rethinking that sort of manager IC
Mm,
paradigm and seeing who's more suitable to be a manager. I think the recent layoffs have sort of just demonstrated that because they've thinking like, how is hierarchy going to work? How is
mm,
everybody going to be more effective? Not sure I agree with all of that because I it's very org specific. They might see more signals than they project outside, but it's all about how can you get the work done? Can you get it in a reasonable capacity to make sure that you're delivering to the bottom line? I think however you structure your org is very specific to a company, but yeah, it's you mentioned about people shouldn't be managers. That's something that also should be evaluated. Like, are they trained enough to be a manager? Do they have the
hmm.
capacity and the resources to be successful?
Right. Yeah. And it's one of these things where, again, that's why I asked the question. What do you want to do? Like, what does your career look like to you? Like, because that's super key. Because if you dig into that question, it's like you figure out, does somebody actually want to be a manager or not? I mean, I know plenty of people, including people very close to me, that had the opportunity, to run a company. That was the path their boss wanted for them, and they said, I really don't think I want to do that. I don't think I'm cut out to be a leader. And I think it's just, you got to be honest with yourself. But if you ask people, okay, so like, what, just honestly, like, what do you want out of your career? Some people don't want to be managers. They want to take the IC route, and there's nothing wrong with that. Don't let people tell you that because you want to be an IC, you're a lesser, human being or employee. That's, I think, the farthest thing from the truth. But the thing is, a lot of you know popular business publications and in the press. I mean, all too often what they do is, the management and being an executive is sort of lauded as sort of the pinnacle of a career. So if you choose not to go that path, then obviously, there must be something wrong with you. And I think it's really disturbing because, again, like, from my experience, like, just, it's true. A lot of people shouldn't be managers. That's just how it is. I mean, I don't know how else to say it in a a diplomatic way, but it's just not the job for people for a lot of people. I mean, it's very hard. It's like herding cats. You got to be a diplomat. You're not going to be doing the IC work. So why do you want to do that job, right? It's actually a really hard job to do well. You have to put other people before you. Hopefully, if you don't, then you're kind of a bad manager, in my opinion. But that's just it just goes against a lot of natural human tendencies. And so it's very difficult. It's not for everybody, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes along the way, as you point out. It's like school of hard knocks. You learned a lot of stuff, and that's the other thing. Do you want to put yourself through that? I don't know. That's your call at the end of the day, but I just hope that people, one of the big takeaways is understanding that being an IC, there's it's absolutely, I think, an applaudable position to be in. That you should,
Yeah.
and hopefully that more and more that's recognized as a viable path. So
Yeah, I remember my manager at Stitch Fix. I had just one manager for the course of the 5 years, but so we were very tight and uh, almost very candid with each other. And so he used to ask at every sort of promotion conversation, "This like, what is your long term goal? Like, what do you want to
mm,
be? And then even if you get this next level, what are you going to achieve? Like, is it something you want? What is the next path after getting that?" So my answer has always been like, I want to grow, I want to learn more things, be more responsible for more things. And what I'm what I'm sort of putting that in perspective now with having done this in a couple of years in this sort of tech leadership role, it's it's how selfless you can be. I
mm,
addressed this about unblocking others, but um, how selfless you can be and not think of like what am I going to achieve versus like what is the team going to achieve. And that
right,
sort of fits in with the manager role as well, but I see it more as in my capacity because how can I make it easier for somebody else in my team and just not think about what I'm doing? Like there's
right,
this notion of snacking and doing like the most tiniest work just to get code out there. I don't do that. I do that if it's needed, if it's like gonna if somebody's blocked or like somebody needs my help, but I don't do that as on a regular basis because that's not something I want to do and is the best use of my time. And so that's where the difference comes as you, and I read this from books. This is not my original idea or something. I think it's like where Larson spoke about it. And that's sort of the guiding book I kind of read when I started, but a lot of those points sort of resonated and kind of make sense now. With, and that's essentially it. It's, with management comes a different challenge. With IC work, it comes a different challenge, and it's all personal. I've learned people who have terminal titles who have been there and just that for the rest of their career. They don't want to do more. They don't want to do less.
yep,
They're happy. They're found their happy place, and that's okay. Like whatever you do, they sometimes say no to promotions. They're like, oh, I don't want this other role because I'm happy what I'm doing. So let me do that. And these larger companies have this. Like in Amazon, I think the senior software engineer is a terminal title because there's a lot of people in there, and it's a heavy role as such. And people just don't want to move from there, and that's okay. It's acceptable. I don't think there's any kind of stigma or peer pressure that needs to be applied to any of these
right,
things because, irrespective of what the publications say, I think it's very personal, and it should be because these things are hard roles. These are not trivial roles that you can just, oh, I'll move up, I'll be better, I'll be whatever. No, there's imposter syndrome that comes in there. There's different kind of challenges. It's it's demonstrably harder as you progress in your career because you have more responsibility, you have more influence, you have more not necessarily people working with you, but it's just harder. So some people don't want that.
hmm
They're comfortable with what they're doing. Totally fine.
totally fine, totally fine. Kind of finishing out. You mentioned that uh, before the show that you have a data platform series on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, I started writing a little bit about like what exactly data platform would look like if I would build it today. And it's kind of from lessons I learned while building it at Stitch Fix and starting from like first principles and seeing if you would build a team. And it got me thinking about what decisions you would make at different sort of levels. So I'm like at part
Hmm.
6 now, and I maybe have 3 more parts, but I want to write like longer form as well because in LinkedIn you just allow that many characters. So I have to literally be brief. But the idea behind that was, um, sort of sharing some things that I've learned and paying it forward, but also um, showcasing that you have to think very meaningfully about the present and the future while making these decisions, because these are larger team oriented decisions around building infrastructure. And so, how do you think about that? How do you reason about that? How do you build the right tooling and abstractions? So, I'm covering those aspects about whether a not necessarily a tool, but how do you think about data quality? How do you think about
Mm,
reading and writing data? What does that encapsulate? How do you ingest data? And so these and security is another big thing. So thinking about all those as you go out and build these, and other ways to do it, you can go purchase a vendor who's doing all this for you. That's totally fine. Companies operate that way. They don't have the skill set to do this. That's totally fine. You can just rely on somebody to do that for you. But if you thought about building it from scratch, I always explored it as, okay, how would I do it? How would I think about these problems?
mm,
How do I what kind of principles I would apply to designing this and architecting this, and what considerations I would take and decisions I would make. So yeah, just started riffing on that, and it became like 6 parts now. So there's more parts I
interesting.
have to add, and yeah, I want to write more longer form on my Substack or something. But it's sort of progressing in a way that is covering different aspects of it. Like the last one being, I believe, data read and write and data. I'm blanking at this point, but like data read and write, I think was the last one.
Yeah, that's cool. What's been the response to the series?
I mean, engagement, impressions, of course, but yeah, people are just like, yeah, a lot of likes. I would say I don't know how to
Yeah,
characterize those in like how what kind of impact it has had, but but yeah, I've got questions. I've got people asking about, oh, are you going to think about data transformation? Are you going to think about this other topic?
mm,
And so I'm sort of feeding those into those as well, but the limited characters I have with LinkedIn is kind of hurting to summarize these things. So I might write a longer form articles
yeah,
to
maybe
summarize
Substack.
that. Yeah, I'm gonna restart some of that those posts because it's hard to actually cover every use case, and you realistically cannot. Like if you talk about even Postgres,
Right.
there's a lot of things you can do with Postgres.
Sure.
S3 is something you can do, but like covering all of that is almost impossible in a short form. But yeah, I'm gonna see how that pans out and see where that takes me.
Careful, you might be writing a book soon. So
I'll hit you up if that happens.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's kind of how these things go. You start with the yeah, social, sort of the catnip, and then you move into longer form blog posts, and before you know it, you have enough. You thought about the topic enough that you want to write a book about it, right? And so that's how it goes for some people. But it's cool you're doing this. I think it's just because the a lot of these things need to be discussed, right? And I think again, it kind of goes back to the body of knowledge and the maturity of the mental models we're developing as an industry. And it's people like yourself who are putting these ideas out there. And I think just and getting these ideas out there, I would say, without you know um, hesitation, really. I think that's a key thing. I talk to enough people, and they're like, "Oh, I don't know if I want to talk about this." I'm like, "Why don't you just go talk about it? Like, what's that risk here? Seriously, like, it's nothing controversial, really. And even if it is, like, this is what these need to be discussed. It's how the field goes forward. But I don't know.
Yeah, I hesitated a bit when I before I started writing more publicly. Is that like how is
Mm,
it going to be perceived? Are people gonna
right?
uh like call me out on things? And it's the response has been mostly positive. People have just been
Yeah.
curious about, hey, how this works. The security one got a lot of vendors poking in. They were like, hey, we
Mm,
do this, we do erasure, we do this. I'm
sure.
like, oh, that's nice. And so there's a lot of like sort of side conversations that can come out of that, and this kind of even came out of the our Monday morning data chat pieces where people were asking about how do you think data strategy in a startup, and that kind of got me
Mm,
thinking into, okay, how would I build a product for a startup, and how would I reasoning about if I was one of the first engineers
right.
in that space. And yes, there's sort of that um, hesitation that people have about putting out content, putting out sort of technical specific things, because the community is usually positive, but like sometimes they tear you apart. Like it can be one or the other. There's I've not
Mhm.
seen that, but I've seen nicer engagements with people, and like people like if people say, "Hey, this is incorrect," I go and modify it. I just like, "Hey, okay, yeah,
Yeah,
that makes sense. I got it wrong. You called me out for." So it's good feedback. It's how you learn. It's acceptable. There's no hate or any kind of like controversy that can generate out of these things. It's mostly technical topics that people are very passionate about. So I tend to write more about that, and I sprinkle a lot of memes here and there so to keep
yeah,
people laughing. But it's uh,
it
it's
helps.
generally that piece that is uh, not just paying it forward, but actually putting it out there and like, hey, does it resonate? Does it help
That's
anybody?
just it.
Yeah,
Get the
providing
ideas
value.
out, right? Yeah,
Yeah,
and see where it lands. I think it's the most important thing because again, it's like social posts, like on LinkedIn, Twitter. It's like it's such a there's some effort involved, but again, it's not like writing a blog post, right? So the whole thing I like to do is just test out ideas. I like to troll a lot these days too. Like I had one on prompt engineering as a new data science or some poll like that. More to just to even see if the idea lands. And it got a lot of impressions and a lot of votes so far, which I thought was kind of incredible. But that was a pure joke. That was not meant as a serious question. But people are like, I don't understand what prompt engineering, how that fits in. And I'm like, that's cool. I mean, let's get the discussion going. Because the thing is, what's a joke today is a serious thing tomorrow, right? And so that's part of the motivation to see, okay, so like what ideas are resonating with people right now, and so I don't know, maybe I'm just at a certain point where I just don't care anymore. I'll just post whatever. But I think it's an interesting spot to be in for precisely that reason, because you can a lot of these ideas you put out there, and you, yourself, me, and a lot of other people, but it's like you just never know what's going to stick. You know, so that's part of the fun of it. And again, once you get past that initial hesitation, it's like the world's your oyster. Now it's just like, let's just posting all kinds of crazy stuff pretty soon, and that's the fun of it. They're just ideas. It's you know they all add to each other. It all adds to the discussion. And again, the fact is like you always got to reserve. There's like 10% of people out there that are just going to hate you no matter what you do, no matter what you say. I think people hated Mother Teresa. That's just how it was, even though she was like a very nice person and did a lot of good in the world. I think there were people that didn't like her either. So if she has haters, then I'm pretty sure like you and I we're going to get some criticism, and that's how it is. So,
yeah.
you know,
I try to not think about a lot of those things because it's like it's part of life. Like
it is.
it, even if like you look at the larger, I don't want to get more philosophical in this, but like we're a speck of dust in the universe. It's like nothing. We're just like, oh, cool, I'm posting on LinkedIn. It doesn't matter. It doesn't
It
matter in the
doesn't.
grand scheme of things.
It really
Nobody.
doesn't.
Yeah. So I tend to not overthink those things. But yeah, it's interesting to see how like the other sort of thing I have is I try to learn more languages. Like I recently
Mm,
taught myself Golang sometime of the year for work, and so that I built some of the muscle there. And I recently picked up Rust, so I'm doing like
nice.
Rust. I've sort of completed like sort of half the Rust book, so I'm seeing like different
Jeez,
patterns about just like it's just the Rust book that helps you with examples. So it's like just
that's cool.
understanding writing if loops, writing whatever, sorry, for loops and conditions and those kinds of things. And my manager is a Rust nerd, so him and I talk about
Mm,
it. So there's a
that's
lot of
awesome.
like uh, we so that's kind of like the motivation I have. And I've not touched a lower level language since 2008, I think, when I studied C++ in undergrad. So I'm
Yeah,
key to know what is happening below the sort of higher level languages, and I want to see how things are built, how memory allocation is happening, how do you actually free up space. And I know this conceptually, but I want to be more thoughtful of those. So my dream is to build a database out of that. So at some
that's
point in
cool.
time, but we'll see how that goes. But I'm sort of adding those skill sets to think about those things more meaningfully.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, again, that's another aspect of career progression, right? It's just, I think, a natural curiosity and continuous learning, and that's another key to how to get ahead. So, um, well, cool. I know we're coming up on time. Great having you on. Great discussion. I always feel like I learn a lot talking to you. So, that's awesome for people who want to, I guess, learn more about you and what you're up to. How can they do that?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, this was great. I enjoyed our previous chat, and this is
Yeah.
equally fun. So I learned a lot of those things talking to more people like you, and so it's very endearing. But yeah, to connect, LinkedIn is the best place. I usually
Cool.
post there more. Twitter is mostly memes and like it's all linked there. So if you go to my LinkedIn page, you'll see all those links off of that. I yeah, mostly that, and I want to get back to Substack. So there's hysterical is the Substack that I write, but I haven't touched that in a in a few months.
It's good
So
though. It's a really good Substack.
yeah, I've been behind on posts, so it's I've mostly been testing content on LinkedIn. So I have to get more regular on that part. But yeah, those things. LinkedIn is easier, and links you can feed off from there. So that's, that's pretty.
Ooh. Well, awesome. Well, again, I hope to chat with you again. Maybe see you at a DBT event or something like that. So, yeah, thanks for being on the pod. We'll talk to you soon. So,
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Thanks for having
thank
me.
you. Thank you.
Hey.